Have you ever, like, really stopped to listen? Not just hear things, but actually consider how sound, shapes everything, our lives, our culture, even how we think. Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. And our source material for this deep dive, it's pretty unique, not just one article, but this collection of notes, observations, some from just a few years ago, 2020, others stretching way, way back to the 1500s, believe it or not. So it gives this like fascinating, multi-layered view on something we just take for granted most days. Our mission really is to pull out the most important bits, the key insights from all these different thoughts, and see how sound actually, defines our world.
Yeah, and it's that huge historical sweep, that philosophical breadth that's so compelling, isn't it? We get this really rare chance to connect ideas about sound that seem totally separate, ancient views right alongside modern digital issues. It really challenges how we think about what we're hearing.
Okay, so let's start with a big one. How do we even, define sound or music when it's just everywhere?
Well, what's fascinating right off the bat is how these notes challenge our assumptions. We tend to think music is just, for fun, for enjoyment. But one note points to music, that background stuff in lifts or shops, and suggests it sort of redefined music for purely utilitarian reasons, not enrichment, just filling space.
Right, just background filler.
Exactly. And then there's this other idea from way back in 1893 saying a recording fixes both sound and culture, that they're inseparable, which makes you wonder, doesn't it? If sound captures culture, what's our modern soundscape actually saying about us now?
That's a huge question. And building on that, here's a really interesting one, note 0375. It suggests music always exists, even if it doesn't involve movement of air. Music is the sound of thought. Musicians give it form. I mean, wow, that changes things, doesn't it?
It really does.
And then ORA845 adds this twist. Sound was meant to be free, but music made a cage for it. What do you make of that tension?
It's a really powerful image, that cage. If we unpack that a bit, it suggests sound itself is maybe limitless, right? But humans, through music, we impose order. We add structure, rhythm, and tension. It's not necessarily saying the cage is bad, but it's how we make sense of the sonic world, how we shape it.
So it's about our intention, our perception.
Precisely. It highlights how we decide what's music. Like note 1351 says, music, or even just sound with a musical pattern. It's potentially always there if we're mindful of hearing it that way. It's about actively listening, not just letting sound wash over you.
Right. And that connects to how we deal with something like ambient music. Note 1329 calls it the default mode network of sound. Like the brain's background hum when it's not focused. It's noise, but different. It has variation, but never enough to make it music or noise. It's in between.
Almost like sonic wallpaper.
Exactly. So maybe take a second and think. How do you personally define music versus just ambient sound? Where do you draw that line between intentional sound and background noise in your own life? Okay, let's pivot a bit. Let's talk about the artistic side. There's a great point in note 1879. Knowing how to use art implements won't make a successful artist any more than someone who doesn't know how to use them. It gives the example of like Vivaldi-style Baroque music, super skillful, obviously complex.
Right, you can hear the technique.
Yeah, but then it contrasts that with minimalism, where maybe incredibly detailed work is totally hidden because the idea wasn't about showing off the details. So skill doesn't always have to be front and center.
And that really makes you question how we judge art, doesn't it? If we connect this to another note, 1521, it says something crucial. All sound, intentionally constructed by humans, shares the same sequential logic, whether it involves theory or not.
Right.
And the kicker, if it sounds wrong, then it is.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it argues this isn't always true for visual art, where wrong can be abstract or intentional. But with music, you generally can't get away with things that are out of tune or out of time. So understanding theory becomes valuable not just to create, but to figure out why something sounds wrong.
Right, that makes total sense. Okay, so what about the creative process itself? Especially starting out, note 1398 says, one of the most difficult things is to write a song that sounds finished when you begin writing it.
Oh, absolutely. That initial spark.
Yeah, the 1378 points out that early drafts often look or sound bad because when you show them to people, they immediately compare them to stuff they already know. They judge it based on familiarity.
Which is a huge hurdle for anything new or different. And that brings us to boundaries, actually. Note 0461 makes the point. Ultimately, art gets defined by boundaries. It's the edges, the limits, that give something its identity.
Even in things we think of as free.
Exactly. Like jazz, we often think, oh, total freedom. But note Euro 606 points out it can have all kinds of rules and constraints. It challenges that comparison to, say, abstract expressionist painting. So often, real creative freedom actually happens within a structure, not without it.
That's a great insight. And speaking of perception, how we take things in, note 1861 suggests reading is about sound, the music of language.
The rhythm and flow of words.
Yeah. And Ear 463 adds that even meaningless lyrics can be meaningful if they simply support the sound. It's about the whole sonic picture.
Mm-hmm.
And then note 0261 drops this bomb. It's not so much that something is true, is that it sounds true. Verisimilitude of truth is often taken as the absolute truth. I mean, I know I do that. You get a vibe from something.
Oh, it just feels true? Is that what they're getting at?
I think so, that intuitive sense. So how often do you, listening now, judge things based on how they sound or feel, rather than, picking apart the facts or the structure underneath? It's something to think about. Okay, let's shift again. Let's get into technology and how it's completely changed the game for sound. Note, 1892 says, before electronic music, the music that composers heard internally was driven by the sound of individual instruments. Makes sense.
Right, they thought in terms of violins, pianos.
Exactly. But then production itself kind of took over. It mentions Brian Eno using the Yamaha DX7 synth as his orchestra.
A classic sound.
Totally. But the note argues that kind of digital music is now fixed by obsolescence. The tech moves on, the sounds might become hard to replicate, whereas a written score, you can play that as long as you have the score and the instruments.
That raises really big questions about longevity, doesn't it? The difference between a fixed recording tied to specific tech and a piece of music that can be constantly reinterpreted.
Yeah. And note 1413 talks about the difficulty of mixing analog and digital sounds, emulsifying them, it says. It's a challenge with mixed results.
That blend can be tricky. And then there's this paradox with modern tools. Note 1247 suggests simple instruments are the best solution because you can achieve even more richness and complexity by using groups of them.
Like an orchestra, basically.
Kind of, yeah. Whereas computers and studios, while they are instruments now, they can make it too difficult to control the number of options. Almost too much choice.
That's fascinating, and it leads right into note 0462, which talks about the old Moog synthesizers versus newer ones. It says the architecture of modern synths, with their menus and screens, has actually slowed the creative process and made it less spontaneous as compared to the knobs and patches of a Moog.
That tactile connection.
Right. The note even suggests that DJ scratching was partly a reaction to this complexity, an attempt to simplify, to make music creation more human again.
That's a really insightful connection, and it ties into control and, crucially, latency. Note 1198 brings up transmission loss when you play a computer. Those tiny delays between your action and the sound at the software level, the hardware level, they create a distance.
Even if it's milliseconds.
Exactly. It distances you from that immediate sonic feedback loop. Note 1295 touches on this too, talking about making acoustic sounds alien with electronic effects. It changes the immediacy.
So think about your own experience. Are you drawn more to simple tools? Or do you like the complexity of digital interfaces when you're making sound, or even just listening? How does that choice affect things for you? Okay, let's zoom out. From the personal to the collective soundscape. How has the sound of our world, our cities, changed? Note 1579 has this really interesting take. The sound of a city hasn't changed that much since the industrial era. Well, it argues most of what we hear is still machinery, traffic, tires on roads, squealing brakes. It does mention some changes between like 1870 and 1920, but implies it takes major technological shifts to really alter a city's basic sound print.
That's quite a thought, the enduring sound of urban life, and it connects to Note 9991's idea of the soundscape being all signal even if it has noise. Meaning even the seemingly random stuff, the background hum, it's all carrying information somehow.
Like hidden messages in the noise.
Kind of. And then you have specific sounds like Note 1578 talking about civil defense sirens. Apparently the pure intervals they use can sound very calming acoustically.
Wait, calming? Sirens?
Acoustically, yes.
Right.
But of course they have to be scary, harsh sounds to actually work as warnings. So there's this conflict between the pure sound and its intended function.
The design versus reality thing again. Okay, this next one. This is really something. Note 1561 discusses social media likes as applause.
Ah, the digital clap.
Right, but it argues as a click is not the same as an expression of liking. It feels like the free will or intentionality of liking has been suppressed. It contrasts actual clapping, a collective act of solidarity, with what it calls a gamed system where people are paid to clap. Metaphorically, of course.
That hits hard, doesn't it? The feeling of manufactured approval online. And connecting that to information flow more broadly, Note 1532 offers a pretty stark warning about the internet. It talks about the danger of trying to resolve or grow up the internet with strict controls, fearing it could just become a database of propaganda.
Wow.
Yeah, and it suggests AI could even generate this stuff. Lies and fake truth out. It compared it to sound amplification. Bad musicianship just gets way worse when you crank it up.
But effects can sometimes cover up the flaws.
Exactly. And the note's crucial insight is the smart person divines the exformation. That's the information that's left out, the stuff you have to read between the lines, discerning the real signal.
Finding the truth in the noise, or maybe despite the noise. And speaking of influence, Note 046 here tells this story about an evangelical Christian group using rock festivals as important foreign policy.
Trying to use music for social change.
Yeah, but the note suggests that ultimately it was just about the effect of patterned sound on the mind and body. It tells of this Moroccan kid who attended, loved the music, but just asked, what are evangelicals?
The pure sound cut through the intended message.
Exactly. The sound itself was the primary experience.
Yeah.
So it makes you think, how do the sounds around you, city noise, phone alerts, online interactions, how do they shape how you feel, what you do, what signals are you actually picking up on, maybe without even realizing it? Okay, let's wrap up by going a bit deeper into the subtle, maybe even the unheard aspects of sound. Note 2020 says, sometimes it's the quiet things that wind up making all the noise. What do you think that means in this context? How we perceive impact?
It's a beautiful phrase, isn't it? And it ties into how our senses work. Note 1176 points out that hearing develops super early, in the womb even, but eventually vision kind of takes over our cognition. So we take photos to offload visual memories, but we don't really do that with sound because so much of it is just noise, static.
Until music comes along.
Right. Music is a way to make noise eventful, to give it structure, meaning make it memorable, where otherwise it's just background.
And what about nature? Note 1206 suggests animal sounds, bird calls. They probably have very specific intentions for the creatures making them, instinctual reasons.
Survival, mating, territory.
Yeah, but we hear it as random noise, or sometimes we interpret it as music. It's our projection onto it.
Mm-hmm. And Note 1256 has this fascinating idea about tropical birds having softer calls because sound travels differently depending on temperature.
So they adapt by staying closer together.
Potentially, yeah. So their softer calls are still effective within their smaller, warmer biosphere. It's about adaptation to the sonic environment.
Amazing. And this brings us back to our internal world, too. Note 0015 reminds us that even in total silence, the mind can make deafening noises.
Internal chatter, memories, anxieties.
Yeah, the power of internal sound shaping our emotions. But then, Note 0016 offers a counterpoint. The interesting thing about randomness is that it can provide variety. Noise is good.
A bit of chaos is necessary.
Maybe. It suggests that without some randomness, some noise, things would be too clean, too defined. Maybe noise is part of what makes things feel alive.
A fascinating thought. So consider this. How much of the noise you perceive day to day is actually external? And how much is coming from inside your own head? Can you learn to find the signal in all that noise, whether it's out there or in here?
Yeah, okay. What a deep dive that was. We've gone from defining sound itself to art, tech, society, biology, all connected through listening.
Absolutely. And that's the whole point, isn't it? Not just gathering facts, but seeing the connections, understanding the implications, and hopefully sparking some new questions about something as fundamental as sound.